design, for 30 years. And, after a few years, the technology becomes obsolete in terms of cybersecurity, securing these devices in terms of, cyber attacks. I started my career and we only had serial networks, which is probably easier to protect because serial networks, you have to have some sort of a gateway router to actually get directly to the PLCs, and then you have all your remote IOs and everything else just on a serial interface. But it has its limitations. The speed was actually a problem. The implementation was a problem. In terms of installation, it's probably a better idea to have daisy chain all your devices because you require less cabling. But technology moves on, and Ethernet networks came up, and control systems started to catch up with this type of technology. It's a lot easier, open, everyone knew, and I was actually very passionate about it. But created another issue, the extension of the attack surface. So how do we start then protecting these systems, these networks, all these devices, and becoming more and more difficult because as technology grows, we have a lot of control systems or vendors that are actually producing these control systems. We start to have PLCs, ICS, HMIs. We start to have drives that are actually all connected to the Ethernet. Everything is now becoming connected. On top of that, we need to increase production. There's a lot of demand when it comes to producing more and more of the product, whatever the product is, whether it's actually more gas or more more bauxite or anything else that comes into what the product is. So then that attack surfaces start increasing, and the requirement to connect IT and OT starts to become more evident. We start to get controlling production in terms of, we need to create better reporting. We need to understand what the production is actually doing. How can we increase the production? And then the IT convergence come in and start then adding more devices that are actually connected directly to the OT network. In some cases, we basically start deploying all this without thinking in security. The aim is, what we want to achieve, but we don't really look at, how we actually achieve this in a secure way. That was actually in the past. Now it's becoming more evident that we need to start working together to protect these systems. And how do we do this? We have constraints. We have constraints from vendor's point of view. You can't really protect without being aligned with the vendor. So the vendors require the system to be qualified with them. For instance, SCADA systems, you can't just install any EDR you want. You need to work with the vendor to make sure that the vendor qualifies that because it is important for them to support it. But when it comes to deployment, there's a very specific procedure of how to install these EDRs in these systems, and you find that most times they create exceptions within the applications to stop the the scanning, if you will, of threats within the application for a specific system files. And that becomes another problem because you think that you are protected because you installed in an EDR, for instance, but you're not because you're essentially creating the exception of system files, so because you don't want to slow down how the SCADA system works. And that's actually what becomes another problem. So how can we actually work together to make sure that we cover the gaps? On top of that, so we start seeing a lot of cybersecurity organizations are very, very well organized. It's very clever people, and they just trying to basically create a business for themselves, whether it's actually financial or just to make a point. So we see things like groups like Lazarus Group. We saw this group, and they're responsible, it's the North Korean group responsible for that hack in 2014, Sony fixtures. They're also responsible for the WannaCry ransomware. We have Fancy Bear, Russian. They actually target energy critical infrastructure. Dragonfly, again, energy and utility sectors. Carbanak, they mostly in the financial sector, but not on the ICS, in the ICS part, but the financial part of the ICS systems, right? And Dark Hydros, also oil and gas. Now, on top of that, we actually start seeing a trend for ransomware as a service. It's actually as scary as it sounds. These organizations, they make the business, sell the business, to essentially create or develop ransomware into ICS systems. Now, the idea here is not to make you scared about what is out there. It's just to make you aware that this is actually happening, and it's actually creates a bit of more concerns and ask you to actually be more aware of what is happening out there and why we need to start securing and be more focused in security and securing ICS systems. Now, so why do we want to do that? Okay, of course, cyber attacks can produce downtimes, depending on how deep the attack is. I have seen customers where they couldn't recover after ransomware for 2 weeks, and especially in oil and gas, where you actually lose millions of dollars a minute. So that could actually be something that to be concerned about. You can actually get sensitive information to be compromised, actually stolen. A security breach can actually lead to spreading across your network, not just your IT network, but also your OT network and any other network that actually is in the organization. And of course, these days we start seeing more and more pressure, especially in critical infrastructure, just to get regulation in place. Now, how do we do this? So I always think that having a framework is actually a good idea to get started. When we did that deployment in the energy company in Australia, so I found that I used specifically in that particular example IEC 62443, because the foundational requirements that they established, they were actually quite good in terms of leading you to create a cybersecurity program step by step. Start from the beginning, doing a few things, and continue on throughout all the foundational requirements, 1 to 7. And of course, once that's actually implemented, then you can actually just come back and review. But at least you have a program that is actually already established. And of course, when you get started, at the beginning, everything is overwhelming. It's too many things to do at once. So you don't want to start overwhelming yourself to actually get protected. You just do a step at a time and follow the journey one step at a time to actually get to where you want to get. But I actually have found the protect, detect, and defend framework a bit more user-friendly. IC 62443, they have so many publications, they have a lot of things that you have to become an expert. I'm not saying that it's negative, I'm saying that it perhaps takes a lot of effort for you to get to where you need to get. And then it's probably better to have a lot easier framework, starting point, and then after that, then you see how you want to comply with any other framework. At the end of the day, yeah, sorry.
I was just going to ask, in reference to those frameworks, was there a particular reason why you went with the IEC versus, say, NIST 80207, or maybe even Dash 82?
So for me, in that particular case, oil and gas was more, ICS 62443 was more aligned to ICS to oil and gas industry and to energy industry. At the end of the day, all the frameworks, in whatever way possible, they will actually overlap, and essentially it's like having a flavor, in terms of what frameworks you want to get in and which specific framework you want to comply to. Okay, what is the requirement? In that particular case, in Australia, it was a requirement for us to comply with IEC 62443 in that specific case. But if you're in Europe, for instance, I will have to go and do NIST 2, right? That's an example, right? So, and again, but you don't. It depends on the industry, and it also depends on what you're comfortable with. Okay, so which one you want to actually comply to. But the key point is, following a framework it will help you in the journey, because at the end of the day, you don't want to feel overwhelmed. You want to start doing something about it, and everything you do is actually going to help you. So, for instance, I actually create this example, and my boss used to tell me when we were actually deploying this framework, it's like, are we secure yet? It's like, well, it depends. So, how can we be 100% secure? Well, we'll just turn the switch off. And that's what actually we would tell us, and he started laughing. But at the end of the day, it's like building a house. Okay, you build the house, you build the shell, but you have windows and you have doors. And then you ask, well, are you secure yet? Well, not really. Someone can actually come with a rock and then break the window and still can get in the house. So, okay, what do? Well, you put bars. Okay, you put the bars. Are you secure yet? Well, no. Someone can actually come with an angle grinder and cut the bars and get it through. So you actually create the controls, or put the controls in place, understanding the risks and understanding, what the consequences and what the likelihood is, and then you put your controls accordingly. And again, the frameworks actually help you through that process. Okay. Now, what do they have? These frameworks, right? In general, they all have, network segmentation, for instance, and this is actually a good one. When we actually deployed our network, we started from scratch, okay, and it was great because we were able to put firewalls in place and network monitoring to then create basically a network and start creating a network, and only basically using, zero trust. And zero trust is a very big concept, right? But we start looking at zero trust. What it means is like, well, every device communicating to other device will have to be implemented so that it can only communicate because it needs to be communicating, okay? So for instance, an engineering station, and it was a Siemens, for instance, or a Rockwell engineering station, connecting to only Rockwell and Siemens devices from that specific site. Okay, that's it, right? So then we created that firewall rule that allows only that port 444626 and also a 502, and that's it, right? We didn't have to actually put anything else. But now, the problem is just to maintain that is very difficult. To define it, design it is very difficult. So, control systems engineers are not really network sort of minded. They're actually only focusing on getting things to work and doing what it needs to be done. And then I'm one of those, right? So when you disable ICMP on a firewall, for instance, hey, my engineering station cannot reach the PLC. So why is that? Because you can't ping it. It's like, well, you can't ping it because ICMP is disabled, so you're not going to be able to ping it. You know, but hang on a minute, I need to ping it because I need to know it's alive. It's like, oh, you don't. All you need to do is just to make sure that your organization can download the logic and monitor the status of the health of the device, but you don't need to ping it. For them, it's actually a very uncomfortable situation because that's what they used to be. They don't really find a way around it, but that's what security is all about, is to get outside your comfort zone and making sure that what you do is needed, not wanted, if you know what I mean. Oh, sorry, it's required as such. So network monitoring is always very important because at the time, we didn't have the very good systems that we have today. Because network monitoring, you can monitor systems in two different ways. So the active monitoring, which essentially you need to understand what is out there. So you need to have a target when it comes to, hey, I want to monitor these subnets, and then have the communications to this. But what happens with those devices that you don't know that they are there? For example, if you buy a package vendor, what a package vendor is essentially a product that you buy from a vendor, say a generator or air compressor, for instance. So you buy the package, but when you actually look inside the cabinets, they have a little switch with PLCs, with different drives, and they have the little network within that package. And when a vendor buys that, they just buys that and puts it in. And then you connect it to your SCADA system, but you don't know what is in there, right? So they have their own subnet. They only give you the interface that is actually designed to interface with your HMI or SCADA server. You don't know what else is inside there. So how do you do a network monitoring for those devices? Okay, so and then it comes the concept of passive monitoring, where passive monitoring essentially what it does is a device that analyzes the traffic across all the network that you're monitoring, and then creates an inventory of all the different devices that are actually actively connected on the network, whether or not you know that they are there or not. So essentially, imagine that it's a broadcast message saying, hey, I'm here, where is my route, what is my gateway, what is my, and then these devices, these new systems, then creates an inventory of all these devices that are out there. So, and combined with the active, you have visibility of all your devices out there. So, and that's actually something very important to understand. And then we have access control, of course, encryption, which is a problem because encryption, these days, vendors are actually working towards that. You see Rockwell trying to create secure CIP, but it's still in beta mode, so we don't really know whether or not it's actually quite reliable as the CIP is. CIP is the protocol that is used in PLC, Rockwell PLCs, by the way. Sorry. So how long would it take for us to get to real encryptions across all the ICS devices within a network, right? So that's something that we also need to think about. Regular updates and patches, that's another one. So if you want to install a patch, the chances are they need to be qualified by the vendor. So because it potentially break their system, and it has happened. Like I remember working for Honeywell, we really have a really strict qualification program for patches, and we try to be up to date, but unfortunately, we always delay by 6 to 8 months. So we couldn't just allow the customer to install the patch. No, you need to make sure that we can qualify it and then install it. And every vendor is the same. Access management. These days, there are a lot of systems that are sold and managed by vendors. So what that means is that they install a vibration system that goes into the plant, but then they have also a VPN or some sort of communication back to the vendor monitoring system, to the console, to monitor those devices. So how you as a customer protect those, right? So then you need to then start looking at secure remote access in a way just to understand when to allow the vendors to communicate to these devices and so forth, right? So it becomes quite convoluted and it starts overlapping into the SLA of the vendors and how do you manage that, right? So you own that system. However, they own the reliability of the system. So that's something that you need to keep aware of. Security training and awareness, is actually something that it has to be an ongoing thing. Intrusion detection systems, similar to what I mentioned before, discovering what the devices are, what are they doing, but also, who are these devices being accessed, and the entities or the people accessing these devices are authorized for this. And of course, physical security, which is obviously something like it needs to happen as well. Imagine that oil and gas, coal seam gas, all the wells, having 5,000 entry points into your ICS network. How do you protect it? You have to have a system that protects them, in terms of cyber, but also physical, so that you don't have access to it. Do you have a question?
Oh yes, I'm just wondering, the network management tool, would that be one of the techniques that is important for the ICS environment?
Yes. So for me, like when I was actually, and I'm talking about my suggestion, right? So for me, it was better to understand the systems and whether or not they were online before the operator came to the door and say, my system is not working, okay? Because it will always be a delay. Operators are always very busy, okay? So, and they were actually, looking, they have an alert, and then by the time that they realize that a system is offline, they've got too many alerts, and that could actually be 1 or 2 hours, okay? Especially when you have a pipeline system. So network monitoring, for me, served in 2 ways. Number one, it was a commissioning tool. So because it was a greenfield project, every time that I put something online, for me was, okay, now it's online, now it's working. And understanding the rate failure of an electronic device, I wanted to make sure that by the time that we finished the project, every device was still working. That's number one. And number two, of course, I wanted to make sure that the performance was monitored, the reliability of the device was monitored. Also, the communication of the device was working. So one of the issues, going back to firewalls, one of the issues that we had, so we configure all these firewall policies, whitelisting policies. But because it's actually very difficult when you wanted to commission one device, so depending on the network engineer that was actually helping you during this commissioning process, some of them, well, I want to make sure it works and then secure it. What that means is I'm going to create an any IP rule within my firewall, make sure it works, and then try to roll it back. The reality is that 2 things. Number one is they probably forget to remove it. And the other thing is, to roll it back and making sure it works once it's actually in production is very difficult. And you don't want to get into trouble that, okay, well, I'm sorry, I was just trying to secure it, but then, I just didn't open the port that I needed. So it is better to actually start and secure it from the get-go and make it work and make that part of your process of, and going back to the monitoring. So once, we start monitoring the communications, to and from SCADA systems, HMIs, engineering stations to these, ICS devices, and then we were actually confirming that this was actually the devices that were needed to communicate to it. Detecting, okay? So endpoint protections, network intrusion, and there's a lot of hardening. So the one thing in here that we always had an issue with is once we implemented all this, so how do we know they were correctly configured? How do we know that there wasn't a misconfiguration out there somewhere? How do we know that we were essentially covering the scope of all the devices within the network? Going back to the new systems, passive discovering all the devices, and then creating gap analysis, integrating with these systems just to make sure that you collect the parameters that tell you the health of all these systems within your monitoring systems, and then creating gap analysis. Hey, I got all these devices that are actually on my network, actively talking on the network. I've got these devices, this amount of devices that have been monitored by the EDR. And so what happens with these other Windows devices that are not being monitored by this EDR, or Active Directory? So how do we get this? And the other complexity is ICS devices, they don't have an operating system as such. They just have a firmware version. You can't install an agent. So some of these systems won't work with those ones. So passive monitoring, passive discovering, and getting the information from different sources, whether it's factory talk, Astacena, or EcoStructure, or anything that you can actually get into one system that can actually monitor all these statuses of all these agents or operating systems, whether or not end of life or not, or they're still current. It is actually a good thing to have. Whew. And defending. Defending is actually more to do with having a plan. What we talked about at the beginning, you're having something that it is tangible, whether it's actually how do you want to approach, adhering with that specific framework, okay? All your early detection and response, how you want to do that, how you want to minimize the downtime, what are the different methodology that you have, okay? And the one important part that I actually was speaking to several customers is, okay, we understand. We are actually the users. We are the engineering team, and we understand how critical this is. How do I go up to the CISO, the CIO, and let him, be aligned to all this, what is happening? And the one thing that they always told me is, always tell the truth. Don't use scare tactics. That doesn't work. Always be honest with the problem, and this is a good idea of how to approach this. Educating and raising awareness. Always be in touch with your management so that they understand, your pain points. Always involve anyone that is can potentially be affected. If you have a problem, an attack, a cyber attack, how can that affect production? Okay, and if they don't have budget, it's simple. Well, if we have a cyber attack, we're going to be losing, 2 weeks times, this amount of hours times this amount of millions. So all I need is 10% of that. So something like that. I don't know. Risk assessment is always very important, okay? I'm actually a very supportive of risk assessment. I've been actually involved in so many risk assessments. And the idea is, to understand, very good, in a good way of what all your risks are. what the likelihood it is, and the consequences, and at the end, the controls. Okay, and I know the controls can actually be a very, very special in ICS, because you don't want to block the communication between the SCADA server and a PLC, or the SCADA server, so the PLC and the remote I/O, right? Because at the end of the day, you will actually be, stopping production, and that's the opposite you want to do. However, if you do things like, hey, I discover a new device, we haven't seen this device before, and now that device is communicating to the PLC, trying to upload some configuration files. Okay, well, this is actually a bit strange. And then you can actually, that's actually a risk. And is it likelihood to happen? Well, it shouldn't happen, right? Because you know what your devices are, so block it, right? So that's just an idea, okay? So I'm not saying that that will resolve all the issues, but it's just how that risk assessment process works. Again, going back to how to convince management to give you budget to work on your cybersecurity program, right? So use real examples. Offer incentives to employees to do the right thing, and giving bonuses or something just to make sure that they are motivated to continue on with with the cybersecurity, or promoting, supporting the cybersecurity program. Always measure and communicate the progress. It's actually important. We talk about the cybersecurity journey, and we're talking about adhering with a framework that helps you through the journey. So always communicate that. Hey, we have a new EDR. We actually we cover all this. The new firewall is actually protecting. We still have these gaps. That type of scenarios. And of course, partner with industry and experts. Oh, you're already here, right? So this is actually a good example. Always be up to date with what is happening out there. So I just brought a few case studies. This is actually a big manufacturing. They have that we helped as armies. So they have limited visibility, lack of control for enforcing policies. We talked about this before. Lack of insight into gaps. So once we helped them throughout that cybersecurity program, then they were able to be, a bit more sort of prepared, more resilient when it comes to, and I'm not going to go through detail because I'm running out of time, and I want to leave some time for, this another manufacturing, very big, worldwide, similar situation, as you can actually see, and probably this is why I wanted to show this. Most customers, big or small, they all have exactly the same, or mostly the same pain points. And going through these cybersecurity programs, they will actually cover most of these pain points. And finally, a pharmaceutical industry, same thing, distributed across a large number of sites. Again, limited visibility, and at the end of the day, they achieve a lot more visibility and a better, a more mature program. Oops. Okay, so I'm just going to leave the last 5 minutes for questions. Any questions? Anything that, I know we have been answering some questions, but is any other further questions, Yes?
What is the name of your framework? I know you described it as the Protect, Detect, and Defend framework, but is there a...
So there are a lot of them. So I don't have a framework. So we work with whatever framework the customers wants to comply to. So we normally look at NIST 800 or NIST or any, and that protect. It's just the idea of a framework, right? So there is not a specific name. It's just the way we describe it. Any further questions? Yeah.
You can actually use COVID as a framework to determine what parts of different frameworks you want to tailor and bring together and use your own. So when it comes to your network there, you're talking about segmentation, you're talking about firewalls. Are you putting firewalls to segment your network out to different
Yes.
Routers and, okay.
So yeah, so the way that we implemented the firewalls was actually very specific. So we have essentially a very well-defined network. So with a core switch, and then switches, and then have one firewall in each side, and that one firewall had essentially it was segmented into several firewalls, one for IT, one for PCN, and then we created from that firewall then the rules across, because all the traffic had to go pass through that firewall.
So you're talking about bringing all of your network monitoring and your device monitoring into one system.
Yes.
And I think that creates a single point of failure. If you have your HMI software monitoring all your devices, that will tell you if your OT equipment is up. And if you have a network monitoring system that's totally separate, at least you're isolated so that if one gets compromised, it doesn't take out everything.
So the one thing for monitoring systems, what is important is that these monitoring systems don't have access to the control systems. So only used for monitoring, okay?
Right, that's what I'm saying. The network
So
monitoring would be just the network equipment, and your HMI would actually monitor your OT equipment.
Yeah, correct. So that's what we did, right? So that's what we did. But there is another system that you can actually put together to monitor everything that is actually too passive, that only monitors passively all the different devices or different systems. What the advantage is that you have one console that have all these that can then interface with the SIEM or with your EDRs or with your Active Directory, so that you can create gap analysis and so forth, right? But the important thing is that make sure it's passive, because if it's passive, that means that it's like a stethoscope, right? So you're only listening to what is happening, but you can't really go through.
Can't make changes.
Exactly. No problem. Any other question?
So for that passive analysis, I suppose you need span ports or
Yes.
type of technology to mirror traffic from different places.
Correct. So that's to detect threat. Okay, the only way you have is to analyze the traffic. Okay, because that's the only way you can actually detect the signature of the traffic. Okay, so yes, so you will need a span port in the core switch to then monitor the network, and you could also then have integrations with other systems like FactoryTalk for ICS, FactoryTalk Asset Center, or just get direct to the EDR and connect directly to the ETR. But that integrations as opposed to poking the network directly. Okay, so that's the idea.
So, in your experience, do you mostly need to just monitor the core switch, or do you also want to monitor your edge switches as well for network traffic?
So it is a great question. It depends on where the traffic is. Okay, so the core switch is a great starting point, and it will tell you basically everything that is active on the network. Okay. However, if there is a specific ICS environment, so because we can't install agents into these devices, if you only install it in the core switch, you might miss the traffic between HMI, SCADA, and engineering sessions to the PLCs. So you know they're there, but you won't have enough evidence to understand what they are or what they're doing. So, but you can actually do a mix and match. You can actually connect into the core switch to do the discovery, and then connect to the edge. One or two switches, sometimes it's only one, to actually get that extra detail that you need from those systems. Yeah. And one more question, and we finish it.
And how do you deal with encrypted traffic?
So encrypted traffic, you don't deal with it. So you confirm that it's encrypted, and you're good, right? So, hey, it's encrypted. You can't really get any extra information from it other than bandwidth to and from of destination and source, and bandwidth. And then you can actually measure the different patterns from that traffic. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. Hopefully you like it. So I'm just love sharing my experience. It's actually been very interesting.
What networking monitoring tool did you use as you commissioned?
So,
What was your favorite tool?
sorry, I'm still on.
2. Yep. Hey, 1, 2, 2, 2. Hey, yep. 1, 2, 2. Hey, yep. 1, 2.